All right, if we would come to order, please. If everyone would please take your seats. Everyone, please take your seat. Please, everyone, turn your cell phones off. Take your conversations to the hall. If you want to continue your interviews or conversation, please go to the hall. We're getting ready. We got a long agenda, so we got a lot to do. So everyone, please take your seats.
We're just going to ask if we want to hand these out. Do you want us to put those out or not? It's from the Georgia Chamber.
No.
Okay.
I'm going to place 2 sign-up sheets. Now listen to me. Shh. We have debated and discussed the charter amendment. I instructed everyone to go by and talk with Jan and with Ed, and I know they have. There have been tons of you. We will have no audience debate or discussion. There will be no handouts distributed for that bill. The committee will be the ones that will be discussing. Can ask any questions they want. There will be a substitute offered. We have listened to you very carefully, and there's been some quite extensive changes made to the bill, and we will be giving copies to the substitute out, but there will be no comments from the audience. You were given your chance for a full week, so some people have said a few things, but I want you to know, we heard it last time. We're also hearing 3 other bills. We're hearing the equalization bill. There's a sign-up sheet down front for the equalization bill. You'll have a chance to make comments from the audience. There's also a sign-up sheet for the 2 capital outlay bills, 1150 and 760. You may sign up to speak to those. So if you want to, if no one signs up, there'll be no one allowed to speak. So we're going in this order. We're going to take the capital outlay bill first. So if I got to ask some representatives from the State Department to please come down, they're going to be helping me out. We're going to sit at this table. I'd like to ask someone, if they would, to please bring me a chair. One of my, Courtney, if y'all could get one of these chairs out there somewhere, roll one out there, because we're going to need a couple of chairs. If y'all will find me another one. We're going to take those bills up first, and it'll be that order. Second, we're going to take up the constitutional amendment for the charter. The third thing we will take up will be equalization, so you'll know that order, that what we will be doing. The next thing we will do, so everybody ready? If you could find us a couple of, thank you so much. I didn't mean for you to have to lift that, Courtney, I'm sorry. And I think we need this today. I'd like to ask you, if you would, please all bow. I'd like to open this meeting with the prayers I always do at our meetings, so please join me in prayer. Most gracious Heavenly Father, how thankful we are once again that the representatives of the people of this great state are coming together to meet with their constituents, their friends, and their constituents to talk and debate and discuss important legislation, dear Heavenly Father, that we have before us today. We ask you to please, dear God, give us the wisdom that we need, and please give us, cool heads and warm hearts so that we can do the right thing and listen and then make the right vote for the boys and girls of this state. Go with us now, lead, guide, and direct us. We ask these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. At this time, I will turn the mic over to Representative Cassis, who will be conducting while we do the chart, the capital outlay.
Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we will be considering, first of all, House Bill 760, relating to capital outlay funds for elementary and secondary education. Sponsor of the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this mic on? Testing. Okay, it's not. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes. I have before you today, I want to say to the committee that the bills, 2 bills you're going to hear at this point, the capital outlay bills and the constitutional amendment that goes with it, are a result of months of work by the QBE Study Funding Commission that was approved last year by you in House Bill 192 to look at ways to fund and look at the funding and look at the different parts of the QBE funding that we needed to correct, we needed to amend, we needed to fix. And these are one recommendation that has 2 parts that we're going to bring to you today. This information was taken up in one of our subcommittees chaired by Representative Terry England And it looked at the building program that we do, and SPLOST is involved in that. Lots of money for building of schools, and has a full part in the capital outlay. We looked at this very carefully, and it was recommended by the committee to make a few changes. And the basic change is at this time we have 4 parts of capital outlay. We have the fast growth funding, that's about $100 million. You correct me, Natalie. I have Lynn Jackson with me, who's with the State Department and is the smartest lady I've ever met. She's going to be my right hand over here today to help me get this done, so she'll help me out. We also have the regular funding, that's $200 million. Then we have what we call the advanced funding, and that's for systems who have difficulty raising enough money over 3 or 4 years to get their building done. And then we have the funding we call low wealth for the systems that just really don't have the money to build the systems. And we're recommending in this proposal, because of the downturn in the economy and the fact that one thing you've got to realize, we had been working with old data. It was taking us several years to get up-to-date data with the 5-year plans. So we were having to give some of these fast growth systems, in the 5 years, they were outgrowing themselves, and they were needing some way to get the money, but till their plans could be updated, the State Department could find the data. So we gave them the fast growth money to do this. But since then, with our marvelous and wonderful new information system we have real-time data now for the first time, so their information is updated really weekly, monthly, and as we need it yearly. So we no longer have a need, and only of the 50 systems that used to take advantage of the fast growth, I think, only 4?
There are 18 this year, but many of those are small city systems.
Small city systems, and so we don't need, so we're talking about not cutting the funds, but rolling them all into the regular. So at this time, I'll ask Lynn just to make some comments. You have the bill before you, so Lynn, if you would.
Thank you, Chairman Coleman. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to first give you just kind of an overview of how capital outlay works. It was originally conceived 30-plus years ago, and the regular program has been around since 79, I believe, and I think the first years that it was funded were 81 and 82. It was originally authorized for $100 million annually. At that time, Georgia wasn't experiencing any growth, actually, in their K-12 population. It began to grow. One of the things you need to understand is that capital outlay regular program is based upon need as established in a local facilities plan, which is updated, fully updated every 5 years, but it is updated continually by school systems, and by our department annually we update the population projections. And the local facilities plan has within it a 5-year projection of population. For instance, this past spring, this coming spring, this is 2012. This coming spring, once we have all the FTE data in from the March count, we will include this 11-12 years information in our plans, and we will roll forward the projections for the population in all 180 school systems in the state of Georgia. And those future population projections is what we fund regular funding upon. Okay? Now, in those plans, we know what kind of classrooms they have in every single school building in the system. We know how large they are. We know how many restrooms there are. We know the width of the hallways, the kitchen cafeteria sizes, the media, the gyms, etc., etc. We know about the instructional spaces. Okay? If a system is growing, they need additional classrooms. If a system is not growing, they may not need additional classrooms, but they may be in a building that was built 20 or 30 or 50 or 60 years ago that needs significant modification and renovation to those existing spaces. They may have buildings with asbestos. There's still some asbestos in some of our school buildings. Much of it's been encapsulated, but some of it's just been covered up. They may have career or what we used to call vocational classrooms that are not appropriate for our moving forward into the 21st century career and technical education classrooms. Sometimes a space needs to be modified to support a different educational program. And our programs are changing. The ways our children learn have changed dramatically in the last 10 or 15 years. This is a digital generation. And many of us in this room are lagging behind on that. But we're trying to make sure that our educational spaces support our educational program and will be able to help take our children forward and be competitive worldwide. That's what this is all about, is a space that supports that educational instructional program. Okay, we've got some recommendations we'd like to make, and
They all have this.
do you all have the talking points?
They do, don't they, Courtney? They all have the talking points in their folders.
You don't. Okay. Looks like,
Yeah, you do. You have
This
this.
or this?
You have this.
okay?
It says, yeah,
Yes.
that's it. Yeah.
Yes. Talking points for legislative changes are House Bill 760 capital outlay legislation talking points.
They don't have them.
You don't have it.
They don't. But we'll talk you through
We'll
it.
get it to you, okay? I'm going to take it section by section and talk to you about our recommendations and why we're making these recommendations, okay? The first thing we're going to talk about is exceptional growth. Exceptional growth, we needed it when it was authorized. We needed it because a growing school system did not have the ability to update that FTE projection every year. For instance, in 1995, if they did their local facilities plan, it was 2,000 before that was updated, the population projections. For that reason, a system might grow 10, 15,000 students in that time if it was a metro system. Many of them did. At that time, the legislature saw fit to implement growth, exceptional growth. Exceptional growth only authorizes funding for growth. However, what you need to realize is that in the regular program, growth is being funded also. What we would like to see happen is the $100 million authorization maximum in growth be rolled into the regular program. Growth funds can only be used for additions or additions or new construction, a brand new school or additions to existing schools. Can't be used for modernization, for modification, for renovation. Okay? Many of our schools have been built in the last 20 years. Those schools in the 90s, we were building 50-year buildings. In the 70s, we were building 20-year buildings because it was all we could do. We didn't have any other funds except what was local funding. So in the 90s, we were building 50-year buildings, but those 50-year buildings are beginning to show some age after 20 years and children being in them every day. They need modification. They need renovation. The ability to put the growth funds into the regular program will allow us to use all of our funding for that, as well as additions or new construction. Okay? I want to share a couple of things with you. I want to share a couple of things with you. We've run some numbers on how growth has changed in the state of Georgia. Currently, to be eligible for growth funding, you must grow a minimum of 65 students a year and 1.5% of your population. Okay? In 2000, in 2002, we had 50 systems that qualified. And per FTE of the growth, they were getting about $3,000 per student in growth funding. This past year, we calculated growth. There were 18 systems, as I told you. And of those 18 systems, the funds per FTE that were generated from growth was $12,000 per FTE. That's not where it ought to be. It ought to be where need is identified, not just raw numbers. Okay? This last year, we had 33 systems that grew more than 65 students. The system that grew the second largest number did not qualify for growth because they did not hit the 1.5% category. We had a system that grew 74 students that earned growth funds, and we had a system that grew almost 2,000 students that earned no growth funding. If we categorize all capital money per need as identified in the plan, and the need can be renovations, it can be modifications, it can be additional classrooms, we will be meeting the needs of 180 school systems rather than meeting the needs of some school systems to a greater degree than others. Okay?
And one thing you got to realize, I see some of you, we're not talking about cutting. Some of you, I know we're playing a shell game. We're not talking about cutting any money.
No.
We're talking about keeping all the money and rolling it in. They're still going to get it and apply for it, but we're getting it where they can use it based on their needs, where they don't have to be building a new building, but they can renovate and do other things. We're handicapping. It's why a lot of this growth money was not even applied for, and we needed it, but we couldn't give it to them. All right.
Exactly. Okay. So that would take care of the changes to the regular and growth program. The low wealth program. Low wealth in Georgia, the categories that derive low wealth are somewhat convoluted. Funding is earned for low wealth in Georgia if the amount per weighted FTE generated in sales tax wealth, property tax wealth, and per capita income wealth is less than 75% of the statewide average in each of those. Now, sometimes it takes a rocket scientist to interpret some of these things. The system also has to be levying at least 12 mills. They must already have a SPLOST or a bond in place, and they must currently be repaying on an advance funded project and owe at least one more year on that. Okay. Most school systems that are low wealth can't afford 2 projects. They can't afford 1 project. How in the world do we expect them to have an advance funded out there that they're paying on and then get a low wealth too? Also, if you look at the way it falls out, some systems that are clearly low wealth systems don't qualify. They don't qualify because if you've got 200 students in your system, $40,000 of property tax wealth divided by 200 looks like more money than it does in some systems. But if all you got is $40,000 for a mill and $85,000 a year in SPLOST revenue, it's going to take you a long time to even put a roof on a 60-year-old building, much less provide instructional space that will support a 21st century career of any sort. We're making recommendations to low wealth to really overhaul the program.
Now listen to this. This is what we're doing.
Okay? We're going to remove the per capita income requirement. Per capita income has nothing to do with how a school system generates funds for a building. The 2 sources of revenue for a building in a school system is property tax wealth and sales tax wealth. That's it. Okay? We want to remove the requirement to have an advance funded project. Like I said, probably can't do 2 if you can't do 1. Remove the weighted FTE and just use FTE. Now, weighted makes sense if you're talking about instructional programs because some children need more than others. But if you're building a space for a child, a space for a child is a space for a child. We have in our allocation of spaces accommodations for special ed. We have accommodations for career and technical, for science labs, things like that. We build them larger, smaller, different shapes, sizes to meet those needs. But allocations of units, things like that, we're talking just FTE for low wealth. There'll now be 2 ways to qualify. One way is for a system to rank in the lowest 25% of earnings for both sales tax and property tax wealth per FTE. Now, what I'm talking about is let's look at the sales tax wealth per FTE for every system, and let's stack them, largest to smallest. the property tax wealth for each system, largest to smallest. The bottom 25% that's in both those categories, they're automatically low wealth and can apply for a low wealth project. But remember, I said there are those systems that have very few students but may have extreme needs. And I believe, and we are recommending as a result of approval from the Commission, that this will meet those needs. If a system has a specific project that they feel they need to apply for, and they don't meet the first category, they come to the facilities department and they say, we would like to do this. And we look at the specific project. And if that specific project, if this system is in that lower 25% of SPLOST revenue, okay, not just property tax wealth, but SPLOST, and remember there are some of them out there that generate less than $100,000 a year, then we'll allow them to submit an application for a specific project that is a worthy project, an earned project, a needy project, and we will work with them on the criteria. Now, they'll have to do certain things. There are other requirements. The additional low wealth requirements are listed on the sheet you have.
You're on page 2 now. You should have. Everybody should have it.
A system must have a SPLOST or millage rate for debt service in place. They're going to have to be doing their part. Okay? A system must levy at least 12 mills. Once again, they have to do their part for maintenance and operations. That's a current requirement. Both of those are current requirements. A system must agree to use State Board of Education approved prototypical specifications. Not prototypical designs, because a design that that an architect puts together for North Georgia and a design for the coastal plains has to be very, very different. A design for a school of 3,000 as opposed to a school of 200 has to be very, very different. So let's talk about prototypical specs. And what I'm talking about is we require certain minimum square footages for certain areas in schools. You can't do something 3 times that size. We'll have an easement somewhat, 5-10% maybe, but no more than that. And sometimes you have to have that just to accomplish a design. That hallway can't be double the size that the minimum requirements are for your population. If you're building a new school or additions to a school, if you earn, based upon your population, 30 classrooms, you're going to build 30 classrooms and not 45 or 50. Okay? We're talking, we will support you if you'll come to us and you will work with us and do what you earn. Now remember, this is projected 5 years out, so by the time they get in it, it ought to be appropriate, shouldn't it? Okay? I know I got to move on. I'm preaching. A system's required local will remain at 8% unless they levy more millage. If they levied 14 mills, we could reduce it by 2. That's 2 more mills than they have to have. And a system applying for low wealth doesn't, if they don't generate enough SPLOST within 5 years, we're going to forward fund them everything but what they generate, and they pay it back with future entitlement. We're going to take care of the needs of the children in this state in terms of instructional spaces no matter where they live. Okay? We've also got some changes in here that are housekeeping changes, cleaning up some obsolete language. There's some language in here that sunset in 1992 and it's still there. There's language in section K1 that talks about a non-binding referenda that if a school, a Board of Education needs to close the school, for instance, if they don't have the funds to operate it any longer and it's below a certain size, then they can be required to have a referenda on whether or not they should close the school, but the referenda is not binding. Why have a non-binding referenda? There are things like that in terms of housekeeping.
You remember the tornado that went through North Georgia? We could not help them out. The state was hands were tied.
At that point.
At that point, this allows us to immediately advance them funds and build those schools.
Exactly. If you remember Clarkdale Elementary School in Cobb County a few years ago that flooded out, there wasn't money available right then. This will allow us to redirect some previously authorized bond funds, use it for that, and then request those bond funds to go toward the others later on. There's a lot in here. I think it's good stuff, and I think it supports the children of the state of Georgia. Now, that's 760.
All right, let's David, let's take that one. Go questions. We'll take. Mr. Chairman.
So we're ready for the.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We'll take some questions on this one.
All right. Before we take some questions on the committee, just one question to the authors.
Yes, sir.
Just by what you have here with your presentation, it just makes a lot of sense. I'm just want to get my mind wrapped around it. How long have we been doing this in the state of Georgia?
70.
79 was
79.
authorized, but 81, 82 were the first years.
Yeah.
And it was just regular at that time. Growth was not authorized till the 90s, low wealth until about 95, 97.
Yeah, it was 97 when Speaker Murphy put in for a couple of systems.
Okay, so very good. All right, we've got some questions. Representative Dudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to actually make a comment. I helped serve as ad hoc member of the committee, Terry England's committee that looked at all this, and this kind of makes your eyes glaze over because it's very complicated. But let me say that I can vouch for the thoroughness and all the alternatives looked at here. And I also make a point that I represent with my new district, Fulton and Forsyth counties, which are the two counties which are going to lose millions of dollars based on moving the exceptional growth funds to regular.
Just for 1 year.
Just for 1 year. But I will say I'm still going to support this measure, and I do, even though it does cost my district some money. Just because there's a formula in place doesn't mean it's actually the right formula. And
Right.
the economy and the current situation with growth in Georgia is different. And we're just trying to adjust the math so that we route the money to the schools that really need it. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you for those comments.
Representative Battles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Help me look at the procedure of applying for let's say, a new school, a new high school in my county. What is the process? And how extensively do you look at the design of that building? Because in some cases they become very ornate, and they may be functional, but they're somewhat Taj Mahals. Tell me what the scrutiny is on that.
In order to participate in state funding, some buildings are built with all local funds, okay?
Right.
But in order to participate in state funding, that new school must be in that local facility plan as an earned school, okay? That's the first step. When we calculate entitlement for each system each year, and entitlement is based on that system's need in ratio to the entire state's need, okay, as identified in the plans. When we calculate entitlement, my field consultants meet with superintendents and or their designees, okay? And they say to them, this is what your entitlement sheet shows. Is there something in your plan you'd like to apply for in the coming fiscal year? And if they say we'd like to apply for this school, we look at what the earnings are, and that's driven by FTE, okay, the earnings for a new school.
Right.
It also is driven by the classrooms that they have in other buildings. Now, if they've got enough space to house those students somewhere else, they don't earn that building, okay? But they submit an application for an adequate amount of space for that building, okay? Adequate size hallways, adequate gym, et cetera, et cetera. And we have certain criteria that we fund, and we don't fund any more than that. For instance, there are schools that we may have funded at $12 million that may have cost $60 million simply because of the design. Now, the designs do come through my office, and I have architects that review them. We have a preliminary set, a check set, and a final set, which includes specifications. They can design at a local choice way more than what we require, but they cannot design less. So anything above and beyond, they have to pay for. And that's how it works.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Howard. Maxwell, sorry. That's what happens when you have two first names.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to think back to my school board days, but part of the answer there, from what I remember back, we would we tried it every way in the world to get advanced funding, exceptional growth funding. We were going back then, but I remember specifically when we were designing schools, we could design based on our FTE counts, and it seemed like we always overbuilt restrooms, lunchroom facilities, media centers, because we knew we was going to have more students coming into those schools. So we would take local funds, SPLOST dollars or whatever we had, and add into that so that and I know one time particularly we were building a school and we got through with it and it was already overcrowded, had to move units out there. We just immediately let another contractor go ahead and put another wing on while the guy was there, because we already built the restrooms and the other facilities. So I think that may answer a little bit, but it was local dollars, some of that going in there. We got certain state funds. The question I had, but you mentioned the bond money or money. I think we had $161 million set aside a year or so ago for bonding for school systems, but because of this dynamic of having to matching funds and waiting for the growth, that money sat there, and maybe just one or two systems was able to get any of that funding out. Is that correct? Or do you remember?
Which funding source are we talking about? Are we talking about the special appropriations?
It was bond money that was there last year, I think, or year before. We had some money set aside for educational bonds that I'd seen in a report.
Sometimes those don't go out as quickly as other bond programs, simply because most systems wait to make sure the money is there before they begin the project, and then they begin the design and maybe even the site work, and then they let the contract for the building.
Okay.
They also sometimes, especially in the last few years with the economic downturn,
The less growth.
revenue is not as fast coming in as they thought it might be. And remember, these are reimbursement bonds. They have to pay the contractor and then submit their invoices and their requisitions to us. We review those documents, and then we send the request for that reimbursement to GSFIC.
Okay, so they would have to have local money to fund it
Yes,
up front
sir.
then. That's what I think was a problem, just the local downturn
And many
there.
of them had a big shortfall
Right,
suddenly.
right. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, there are no other questions.
What I want to do is go ahead and do this, and then we want to take up, we got to get some people to another meeting, so I'll take up another bill. Then we'll come back to the second part, so let's go and take a vote on this one.
Very well. Representative Dixon.
Motion for due pass.
Very well. Sir. Representative Dudgeon seconds. Very well. You have before you House Bill 760. All in favor of a due pass motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In order to let people get to, we have people that got tight schedules and things on tight schedule, but at this time we're going to call, we're about to have an equal opportunity. Let's call House Bill 1162. So, excuse me, pardon? Resolution, HR 1162. So, all right, and the author of that is Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones. So, 1162, we'll do that one. So, everybody's got it in your folder. Does everyone? Now, let me say this: we are going to have, you should have in your folder the old bill, but you are going to get a substitute. I think, Representative Jones, aren't you? Do they have the substitutes with? You have the subs. Who does not have a sub? Raise your hand. We'll get them to you. Did you put them in the folder? They should be in your folder. Look in your folder and see if it's in there. Is it in there? You got it? Okay. Speaker Pro Tem, you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'd like to first offer a substitute to House Bill 797.
All right.
Do you have that in your folder?
All right, look in your folders. You should have House Bill 797.
LC 334530S.
I know. You should have the bills in the folder, right? The old bill should be in your folder. Now we have the sub. We're going to here also, but pull the old bill. You have that. Then we're going to pull the substitute. 797. Just stay with me. Stay with me. Just stay with me. Don't panic. We're not going to take it up, vote on it. I just want you to pull it. 797. Everybody have it? Now, we're going to pass out the substitute. All right, everybody ready? Don't panic. Just stay with me. Everyone can relax. We're not going to, I'm just, Speaker, Mr. Pro Tem, I just don't think I can take a discussion on this today. I'm going to allow you to speak on it, though, okay?
I'll just say a word on it.
And then we'll come back and do it at another time.
Okay. All that the substitute to House Bill 797 does is it repeals the previous law that we passed, House Bill 881 back in 2008, relating to the Georgia Charter Schools Commission. Secondarily, it takes a very small amount, maybe 10 lines. The first lines from 881, simply some findings on charter schools. There's nothing else in the bill. This would be the starting point for eventual enabling legislation should the constitutional amendment pass.
So as to this point, 797, as you see it in your folder, you can toss because it's being replaced by substitute LC 334530S. Am I correct?
That is correct.
So that's and we will not. I'm not going to have any discussion today. We have a tight schedule. We'll take this up at the request of the author. Okay. So at this time, we'll take up. Oh, I do have one question, if I could. 14. Who is that? Raise your hand. Number 14. No, sir, we're not. Is that okay? No, okay. Your question was answered, right?
There's no new language other than the word repeal, repealing the previous act that we passed. The few lines that are in there are taken verbatim from the previous bill. So I'll move to the substitute to H.R. 1162, LC 334528S. There are no changes in Section 1.
Wait, everybody have
Before I go through the changes, we talked about the merits of the issue last time. I'm not suggesting we won't today, but I won't go back over that initially, other than to say that the changes that I've made have been as a result of a tremendous amount of input from both sides of the aisle. I've taken every suggestion, massaged it, try to see how we could put that together. Interestingly, there was an amazing consensus on what language needed to be struck and what language needed to remain. Section 1, there is no change from the previous version. Section 2, there is no change from the previous version. Both of those sections simply clarify that the state has the authority to establish policies for public education in Georgia. That is a result of the Supreme Court decision of May in 2010 that at least called into question, certainly in my mind and that of many others, as to whether that our authority could be challenged legally. Section 3, that is where many of the changes take place. In Section 3, the original bill said that the General Assembly may define and provide by law for the creation of special schools and so on. That did not change. The lines that listed some of the current special schools and had some language that gave folks some heartburn, I removed, and now it reads, special schools may include charter schools, semicolon, provided, however, that special schools shall only be public schools. In Section 4, the question changed some to remove the clause raising student achievement for the purpose of raising student achievement. That is now not there. And it also changed the word and between state and local to or. So now the question reads, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow state or local approval of public charter schools upon the request of local communities? Those are the changes, and I would be happy to take questions at this time.
Madam Chair, before we start out, let me ask you this, isn't it true that literally, I don't know how many of your doors stayed open, you've talked with all of the organizations, everyone who requested the letters we got had a chance to come and give you input, because I instructed earlier that the audience, I'd take no more comments from the audience, but they did have a chance, and you did speak to many people.
Right.
And it's my opinion, because having spoken to school boards, superintendents, teachers, the number one request that I saw, really the number 1 and 2 that we brought to you, were the concerns about that was in Section 3 and Section 4.
Right.
And both of those sections were changed based on input. Is that not correct?
The most requested change was that we not put it into the state constitution how special schools could be funded. And the second most requested change, and these were by a long shot, was that we removed the clause that said for the purpose of raising student achievement.
Right. That's
There were
one I
other
heard
changes
over and
as
over and
well
over.
that, if a few here or there wanted it,
Right.
and I felt that it didn't impair the integrity of the goal here, that I made those changes.
All right. I have several questions.
Okay.
Number one, I'm not sure that's all right. Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jones, I appreciate you listening to everybody. It never fails, and I haven't been here as long as some folks, but I get a little heartburn when things get done here, and if it passes, it goes over to the Senate, and it comes back with entirely different language. If this thing passes, can we have your assurance that any changes that the Senate makes to this bill, that you will not go along with them? If it is a change that you have taken out and they put back in.
I will not entertain adding language that we've omitted. And I've spoken with the chair of the Education Committee and told him that what is here is pretty well slimmed down, and that it is the result of a lot of negotiations between my fellow Republicans, my friends in the Democrat caucus, as well as folks representing their local districts back home.
But he takes his orders from a couple of other folks there.
That's right. But I can't assure that they won't do it.
I know, but I'm wanting an assurance from you that you
Yes.
will not allow that change to be voted on by the House after
That's right.
if it's done.
I think this is a good bill, and I don't think it's pretty simple. There's very few words now that we're changing. I'm comfortable with this bill, and I am personally not interested in changing this bill. But I know that I also don't want to. It is a legislative process, and I don't want to jeopardize the relations with the Senate by telling them flat out you can't do this. But I have gone to the trouble of spoken with the governor's people. I've spoken with our leadership, and I've spoken with the chair over there, and I'm confident that the bill will remain like this.
Okay,
But
and
I'm not interested in putting the language back in that we've taken out or modifying it in any substantive way.
Okay, I still think we're talking around a little bit.
Well, I don't feel like I can make a commitment what they may or may not do, but I have engaged them. To be honest, I have mostly been working with members in this body. I have met more with Democrats in this body than I have Republicans over there. But I had a conversation on the floor today when the bill was finished with the chairman, and he conveyed to me that I'm good with what you're good with.
Okay. Basically, what I'm asking you
Yes.
is that if they change it, and it comes back to us with agree or disagree, that you're going to disagree with the change.
I will disagree. Oh, I didn't realize that's what you were asking.
Yeah, I don't want to. If
No.
it comes up for another vote in the House, I don't want to have to vote on something
That's
that
right.
is
That's right.
different than what
That's
might
right.
get passed.
That's right. If there is a comma that is changed in the bill, I will disagree.
All right, thank you.
Okay. This order is where you came up. Number 3, that is, all right, Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Jones, I also want to express my appreciation for you being willing to talk to folks about this. Obviously, there's some strong feelings on both sides of this issue. I do have a question about the change in Section 3 dealing with the language that was removed talked about adjusting the proportion of state funds and saying that that was explicitly okay. By removing that language, is it your understanding that therefore will not be permissible to withhold local portion of education funds from the district as part of the state funding a state-sanctioned charter school?
By that, do you mean that it is constitutional?
Yes.
I don't know if it's constitutional or not. The Supreme Court did not act on that measure or that portion. I clearly thought it would be helpful to have it in there. I'm willing to take it out, but the Supreme Court did not rule on it.
I mean, obviously one of the concerns that a lot of people have had, and myself included, is the ability of the state to withhold an equivalent amount of local funds from a local district when there was a state-approved charter school in that district. And so I guess my question is it your understanding that having even struck this language out, that would still be an approach the state intends to take if, this
the
passes?
legislature?
Yes.
I don't know if the legislature intends to, but in good faith, that's why I substituted this out. In good faith, that we are. The question is, me personally, I'm open to how we fund these schools. My only sort of line in the sand is that I want them to be adequately funded, because I think that's the state's responsibility. But I don't have. I liked the way we funded it before. I thought that was an appropriate way, but I also know that different states do it differently, and I have since learned there are other approaches we could take that might be more palatable, for example, to you, and I am equally happy to consider that.
Right. So, I mean, if we were to if I was to offer some language that explicitly said that the state is not permitted to do that which, was explicitly permitted in the prior version, would you be open to that?
You mean in the Constitution?
In the constitutional amendment?
No. I would not be. I think that this is a carefully considered agreement, and that I don't think we should bind the hands of the legislature at this point either way. But I realize and appreciate going through this process that there is an interest in looking at another manner, and I am more than happy to consider that.
Thank you. All right. Number 10, that is Representative Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the issue of redirecting, is it not true that we already redirect certain local funds through equalization?
That is correct. If we put language in there, it would make it very difficult to have a 5 mil share calculation done in the QBE. In fact, we couldn't. And you also could not have the equalization. So I think there could be unintended consequences by saying you can't, because then it would be subject to a lawsuit.
And so it gets back to the issue of, we've learned a lot in 3 years. We actually had a pretty good system going. We've learned a lot in 3 years, and the fact of the matter is, if we get this passed, we're going to go back and take a look at what other states have done over the last 3 years in terms of figuring out the best way to fund charter schools. Correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Number 14. I can't. Where's that? Who's that? 14. Hold your hand up. Okay, I see your shot. All right. Taylor.
Local systems currently have the authority to create charter schools, right, under the Constitution?
That is correct.
So if you look at line 52, would you be open to change and just taking out "or local" there, so it says, "Shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow state approval"?
I would not. I think it would be confusing to the state, to our state citizens, because school boards have taken such a hard line in approving local startup charter schools. There are only 58 in the entire state. Less than 2% of children have access to a locally chartered charter school. I think it would leave the impression, because most people have never met charter school, a locally startup charter school. They've never met a child that attends one. They've never met a teacher that attends one. It would be misleading and would give the impression that only the state would have the authority to approve it. That's why, but I did change it at the request of members of the Democrat caucus to "or," because they thought that would be more, would be clearer.
I wish you.
And that was actually the last change I made this morning when I was asked by a few people if I had the language. I thought I had the language, and I was making that final change at 10 or 11 this morning.
Have you heard about? In some states, they have like an exclusivity clause where local systems that are chartering schools, I guess, up to people's standards or to their satisfaction, have the exclusive authority to continue to charter schools and not be overridden by some other outside authorizer. Have you looked at that, and would you consider putting that in like the implementing legislation, or have you looked at that? And I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I have looked at, I have a chart of what all the states allow. That is a rare one. That was actually something that was offered last time, 4 years ago. The concern that folks with charter schools had is that they felt that in some school districts that they might be approved but then starved of funds. For example, local startup charter schools in Georgia on average receive about 70% of the funds that others do. I just had the numbers run by the Department of Education as to what the statewide average of SPLOST funds are on an FTE basis, plus what the average funds are from the state for the, in fact, what you were talking about with the capital outlay funds. The two of those together average $1,000. They're already short $1,000, and then on top of that, they are oftentimes given less. And I think it's important that they have that option, so that, you know, my experience has been, I think, the charter schools in Georgia has been, they prefer to be locally chartered. They really do. They have more support, boots on the ground, people who can help them. They have access to more training, more assistance and support. So that is their first preference. But it's a balance, Representative, that you don't want. I think right now we've tipped it too far in one direction, and I think we want to find that middle ground where it's just a balance for charter schools and for the school districts.
All right, this 25. Who is that? That's Representative Ash.
I'm number 25.
All right.
Thank you for all of the time and all of the consideration and all of the changes that have been made to this legislation. I am not a learned attorney, but I've heard from lots of learned attorneys who are not certain at all about the needs for the changes to Section 1 and Section 2, and I would just like to go on record as being one of the folks who hears and understands their concerns about why are we doing this. And I guess I go back to Elvin Wilbank's comment today that Peter Drucker suggested that sometimes slower is faster. And I would suggest with all respect that the pace of these changes today to 1162, which I perceive to be major policy changes for the way in which education is provided in Georgia, may have appeared so quickly, and there are so many people in this audience who haven't seen this legislation, that I'm concerned about letting the ink dry before we make important decisions. Drucker said that sometimes slower is faster, and I have a huge respect for lots of the folks in this room who have not yet had an opportunity to weigh in on these changes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Number 10.
Once again,
Number 10, yes. All right, excuse me, Representative.
Madam Pro Tem, this language has been in the bill since the very beginning, correct? And we've sat with members of the school boards, members of these superintendents, representatives of various teacher organizations, representatives of the governor's office, representatives of legislative council, representatives of various parents groups, representatives of various charter school groups, representatives of, if I missed anyone yet, because we have sat through endless meetings with a lot of different groups that have worked on just this language and discussed the propriety of this particular language, correct?
That's correct, but the bill is distinct now in what it doesn't have, not in what it does have.
And in addition to that, we also have the ability to look back at both the Supreme Court decision that came out last May, both the majority and minority opinion, the minority opinion that basically outlined the possible downsides of the majority opinion if action is not taken, correct?
That's correct.
We also have the opinions of the Attorney General's office that weighed in after the opinion was handed down and outlined the concerns that if we do not act, the impact that it'll have on the state's ability to move Georgia forward in education, correct?
That's correct.
So we've had, since May, about 8 months worth of discussions with a lot of different lawyers, a lot of different interest groups, and we've continued those discussions in earnest over the last few weeks since we first dropped this bill, correct?
That's correct.
Can you remember the last time we had more meetings on a particular bill than this?
No.
Since the passage of 881, in which we had a lot of meetings.
No, in fact, I would like to say that the other two primary bills that this body is considering today will change state law in a far more dramatic way than this will. So you might want to consider that with the other bills that you're considering today. In fact, I would suggest that you consider in reading these very few words that we are simply taking the Constitution to actions that y'all have been, I believe, supportive of for the last 14 years. The state, if you look at Section 3, where the General Assembly may define special schools, and then, Section 3 is the one we're talking about. It can define special schools, and special schools may include charter schools provided they are public schools. We have a 14-year history of that. CCAT in Statesboro, I've never heard of them legally challenged. I've never heard of anyone say anything negative about it. Operated for 7 years as a state special school on state funding only. They have been in existence now for 10 years. Scholars Academy in Clayton County operated for 4 years as a charter school that was a special school, but it was a public school. Odyssey has been one since 2001. Ivy Prep opened and operated for 2 years as a special school, a charter school. This is not a change in the policy of Georgia that we have had until that decision in May of last year. It is simply allowing us to go back to the way we have operated since before that decision.
I have about 3 more questions I want to take. One more comment because we got.
I think it's important to bear in all the discussions we've had with all the various groups over the last few weeks regarding Sections 1 and Sections 2. No one has objected to the language. Some folks have questioned its necessity. Remember, we talked about different lawyers can disagree, but no one has actually said that this language should not be the state policy. Folks have just questioned whether or not it's necessary.
Period.
I think that's true, and if you fall in the camp of thinking it's necessary, then you want it there. If you fall in the camp of thinking it's unnecessary, what is there to object to the General Assembly by general law providing for the establishment of education policies for such public education? If not, if you why would you need an education committee? I don't really understand the debate or the concern over it. It's simply affirming, perhaps redundantly, if that's how you believe, what we have been doing for as long as each one of us has served on the education committee.
Okay, 16. That's all right, Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions for the President. Is it true that 34 states now have an alternate authorizer law of some kind?
That is correct.
And isn't it true that the alternate authorizer law passed 4 years ago was a material piece of our Race to the Top application?
That is correct.
It was seen to be meaningful by the Obama administration in approving us as a Race to the Top state. I think this bill certainly just provides certainty that was in place in 881 to reestablish it.
Thank you. All right, I have 2 more. Let's see, 3 more rather. All right, number 4, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Pro Tem, I have a couple of questions. One, I want to raise a similar issue that I raised at the first hearing, which is to speak to the first couple of sections. I'm concerned when I hear members of this committee talk about the speed, and I want, as one of the co-authors of this bill, for you to speak to the need to clarify the role of the state. And then the second question that I have that I'd like for you to speak to, we are in a situation currently that if this were clarified in the state, not just the role that the state plays in setting policy, but also the ability to create charter schools, I think about those green jackets in Gwinnett County. For those that may not be familiar, this was a school that started out as a state charter school, then it became a state commissioned school, and then after it was struck, Gwinnett County, and we just saw the superintendent here, and I wish I could have asked about that. For some reason, they accepted them, and then just last week have denied them. And so I respect all the members of this committee and all of the individuals who are interested in education, but as a parent, I have to say, if I am a parent of one of those young ladies at Ivy Preparatory Academy that has the record that it does, what are we to say to those parents? That we should just take a couple of more years to figure out how to do this, or should we do what is necessary that the court has said we need to clarify in our Constitution to ensure that this state has a role in setting policy as well as creating charter schools? And how long do children have to wait for us to do that?
Well, as regards to the first two sections, again, and I have members of both parties who have questioned, as you have, not many, it's only been a couple who have actually said, but it's been a very few, but is this necessary? Well, again, I suggest if you fall into the camp of it is not necessary, then it is simply reaffirming what we have been doing for the last 50 years in setting state policy. But the court did, in 6 different occasions in the 24-page opinion with regard to local school boards' authority, hold that local boards of education have the exclusive authority to fulfill one of the primary obligations of the state, namely the provision of an adequate public education for citizens. So the fact that 3 of 4 Supreme Court justices disagreed with the opinion of the majority, the fact that we had a trial court judge who threw it out in a summary judgment, that we have legislative counsel who believes that it is certainly questionable as to whether we have that authority. To me, it is the prudent and the careful thing, the responsible act for us to do to simply affirm what we have been doing for the last 50 years. With regard to the second, again, for the last 14 years, we have had special schools defined as charter schools and supported by the state. I am simply taking us back to where I believe prior to that decision, every one of us would have thought the Constitution would be interpreted. And I would hope for your favorable consideration.
All right. I have 2 more questions we'll take. All right, Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there have been a lot of discussions about the bill or the resolution, and but to Representative Lindsley, it didn't end when the door shut and this committee, began to meet. Obviously, we're still in the discussion period and evaluation. So, yes, everybody had an opportunity to come and meet and talk about some concerns, but certainly this is part of that ongoing conversation, so shouldn't be, discounted. I just wanted to go back to the funding issue again because, as you know, that is my biggest concern. Because the way the Charter Commission ended up operating was if there was a state-authorized charter school, the state decided what a local government, they took all of the local funds that were raised, they divided it by the number of students in that district and decided that's what the local district's per capita amount is, and then the state withheld an equivalent amount based on the number of students that were going to be in that state-sanctioned charter school. So it's not exactly that the state took local money because they never actually had the local money to take and withhold, so it's not a question of that. And so it is also dissimilar to QBE, which has a formula with a lot of weights and factors. It's a very simple formula that the Charter Commission used, but it did in fact take that equivalent amount of money out of what the state was giving to the local district under QBE. So my question, I know you answered it, but it wasn't clear to me what your answer was. Okay. Is that still on the table, even removing this language? Because if it is, it would certainly give a lot of people a lot more comfort with this resolution to have language in there that specifically says, however, the state will not withhold any amounts based on local revenue for schools in order to fund this. And and I realize this is a very rambling question, but you know, it's just a matter. I mean, this is really important policy, and you know, what is the future we envision with this? Is it that the state ends up operating a statewide system of independent charter schools? Because I don't think anybody really wants to be in that business as a state. I mean, it seems to me that if we're going to do this, we want to do it in such a way that these are charter systems, schools that aren't accepted at the local level, so they had some deficiencies. Perhaps when they got to the state said their deficiencies.
Let's get to our question now, because we could go on. I
understand, but I didn't want to talk to the bill and go down there.
I know.
So, and I don't often do this.
I know you don't. That's why I've allowed you to go on and on.
Thank you. But
a lot of paragraphs.
But you know, if we're doing this in a way to allow those charter schools a chance to start, and then working with them to allow them to transition into the local systems, that seems to be a smarter policy approach to that. And it's the state that has the skin in the game initially, because we're saying local systems, you didn't like them, we like them, so you know, we'll belly up to the bar, we will fund it, and we will help you, the school, work to a point where you are going to be acceptable to the local district. And obviously you work with the local district as well. So I mean, so the funding issue, I think, is critical, and the policy issues that are wrapped around that, I think, are really important as well. And I know that's not a question,
and you
but
know what? I hear your concerns, and I think that is a legitimate perspective and concern. It is not contained in this bill, and I don't mean that flippantly, because I want to say a little more. I don't think you could put funding in there that would say you can't. And of course, it didn't say local funds originally. It said an adjustment of state funds. And I realize you interpret that as local funding. But we do that, and I'm not suggesting that the enabling legislation will fund them in the same manner. I truly am telling you I'm open to how we should change that. But I will say that with equalization and 5 mil share, we do that now all around the state. I am not suggesting, though, that we will fund these potential schools in the same manner that they were before. My goal is that they are adequately funded. But secondarily, I don't know, and again, it's not contained in this resolution, because this simply says they can define them and they can be charter schools, which is what we've had a history of for 14 years. But I will say that I think we have to also recognize when we get to the enabling legislation, for example, CCAT in Statesboro was turned down 4 times in a row by the state, by their local school board. They didn't want to be a state special school. They wanted to be a locally approved school, and a successful one. Ivy Prep wanted to, you know, they were just turned down for their renewal, and I have the letter from the Gwinnett Public Schools, and it said one reason for turning it down, it listed 7, was that the petition does not clearly identify a unique and innovative curriculum design, an instructional program to address the needs. I think that most of the time it will work, that they could be locally approved, but I think there will be times, such as this and with CCAT, where that's just not really going to happen. In addition, in a 21st century delivery of public education and with technology that we have, it can't always be confined to an attendance zone or to a district zone. And I use, you know, there are places in South Georgia, I just use that as one example, Quitman County School Board, they have 200 students in the entire county. The only way they would ever be able to have a choice might be if there was a charter school that drew across a several county area, perhaps affiliated with a VOTEC school. I'm not suggesting that will happen, but I think that we have to be open to change. But I hear your concerns, and I don't think that we want most charter schools to be state authorized schools. I think we want to continue to encourage local school boards to authorize, but I would suggest that the numbers simply show that they haven't done it. And but that I also don't want to put in the Constitution anything that would mean that can't change. I mean, I believe, and I am hopeful, that in the future more school boards will authorize them when it's appropriate. There will be times when it's not appropriate for them because they need a larger attendance zone. But I hear your concerns. And I think
That's. I think this most. I've got two more questions. Is all I'm taking, and I think most of us know what we want to do. So 24. You had a number 24.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Then 14. That's it. Where's 14? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to first of all go on the record to say that is it not true that I have reserved the right to remove my name from this bill at any point that we're not moving in a direction that I'm comfortable with?
Right.
And honestly, personally, I have nothing to gain but grief as being involved with this resolution. But I wanted to say that, you know, I've had the great fortune of having my children in charter schools that were locally approved. But that's not the case for many of our kids in the state. And if you think about it, there is a somewhat adversarial relationship built in when a petitioner goes to a local LEA. And we are not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that those local school districts are not doing what they believe is right. But when those petitioners, oftentimes parents and communities, when those petitioners are turned down, I've been told over and over and over that their ability, their recourse is to either run for the school board or vote against their school board member, which I just find to be unrealistic. I did also want to go on the record to say one thing for future hearings. I've gotten a lot of now information from groups opposing this legislation, and what I would say in the future is that it would be very helpful and may be mind-changing in some cases to hear from you if you have concerns before we get this far or before we move at all. And so my good friend Kathy made a comment that I wanted to sort of echo my own way. I had a wonderful conversation with Michael Lomax, who's president of United Negro College Fund. And what he said is that we often, I'm going to have to look at my notes, we often let the perfect ruin the good. So are what we doing here, is it perfect? No. Are what the local school system's doing, it's not perfect, but we have a good opportunity here to allow for an alternate authorizer. And is that not true, Mr. Chairman?
That is a good question. Is that not true? That is true. I was wondering when he's going to get to it. That is true. So that was your question. Very good question. All right. I was waiting for that question. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Taylor.
I don't have a question, but I do have two small amendments to offer at the appropriate time.
All right, you have that right, and now is the time, so I'll let you offer your amendments. Betsy, if you'll take these down, and now is the time, because I have no more, but I guess we offer the amendment. Help me out. We got to go ahead and get a motion before we offer the amendment. So first of all, I have a motion that the bill be accepted. Do I have a second? Now your amendment's in order. So Betsy, if you'll take these down.
The first one, Mr. Chairman, and I
we'll take it up and vote on it
made
as
a few
you go.
Copies, but the first one is very simple. The second one, you may need copies.
All right, give us the first one.
The first one is on line 2, and it just removes the words "or local." So it'll read, "Shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow state approval of public charter schools upon the request of local communities?" And so 52. I'm sorry.
Hey, are you on the first page or?
Page 2, line
page
52.
2.
I'm sorry.
Page 2, line what now?
Page 2, line 52.
52, okay.
And it would remove the words "or local." So the question would read, "Shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow state approval of public charter schools upon the request of local communities?" And
all right.
Here's my, if I may explain.
All right, you do.
My concern is I think the question is much better than the original question that I read, but I think it still pushes people in one direction on this question. I think because it implies to people who may not know that currently local governments do not have the authority to create charter schools, which the pro tem has already acknowledged that they do. And so I want the question to be as clear as possible so that the public who's voting on this to amend the Constitution understands we're not asking you and we're not trying to confuse you to say that local governments get the authority, because they already have the authority. We're saying we want to give the state the new authority over this piece of public education.
Okay, you hear the amendment. Do I have a second? I have a second. Do I have any comments or questions? I'll give you a chance to comment. Let me get the questions from here first. All right. Number 10, what's your comment?
The comment, Mr. Chairman, is actually, I believe that the amendment further confuses the voter rather than clarifies the vote to the voter.
All right, further.
The fact of the matter is, as explained by the Speaker Pro Tem, many citizens in Georgia are not necessarily familiar with charter schools. When they go into the ballot place and cast their vote, they're likely to think, if we were to simply read Representative Taylor's recommendation, since they're not familiar with charter schools, that only the state will be chartering schools. This simply clarifies, in my opinion, the fact that in the future there will be both a state or local approval will be allowed. So it simply clarifies what will take place if this amendment takes place, and that's why I think it's a much better the way it's read than the suggestion made.
All right, one more comment. Number 3, Reverend Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm shocked that an attorney would use such a text interpretation because the question is, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow state, to allow local? I mean, there is nothing actually in this resolution that is amending the Constitution to allow local approval. So I think if the meaning that Representative Lindsay is actually trying to achieve, seems to me that you'd want to say, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to also allow the state to authorize? I mean, that I think captures what really is the question. But
we have an amendment. All right. Representative Jones, you have a right to make a comment.
Yes, I'd like to ask that you please vote vote against the amendment. I think it is misleading, the fact that it's actually 1.8% of students in Georgia and teachers now work or attend school in a locally chartered or a startup charter school, that it would be misleading. I think that if we constitutional amendment questions rarely encompass everything in the meaning of the language here, and further to the point, we don't mention as well, shall the Constitution be amended to allow the state to have, to clarify that the state has the authority to establish education policies, including a state salary schedule, retirement, and other things. I mean, I haven't heard that. If the intent is to be clear, I appreciate that. If the intent is to be to hurt the question, then it sounds like you're not for the bill.
All right.
But it is, I do think it would be misleading to the public,
All right.
because most people are not.
All right, comment from, you get the last comment.
And actually, I'd like to.
No, we're going through with this amendment.
Okay, all right, Mr. Chairman. Well, here's what I'll say. I've never seen a question. I haven't been around here long. So if you have one, please show me. A question that includes things that are not included in the amendment itself. What I'm saying is, let's let the question include what the actual legislation says, and that is we want the state to have a new authority. I think we've been misleading to the people who will go out here and vote, Mr. Chairman, by inferring to them that local governments don't have this authority. We want the state to have a new authority to do this. And if we believe that so much, then we ought to stand up and say it. And so I urge the members to vote yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, you have your amendment. Would you read it, Betsy? Here's what we're voting on. Shh.
All right, on line 52, we'd be striking the words "or local," so the question would say, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow state approval of public charter schools upon the request of local communities?
Mr. Chairman, I do have to say one thing. This is actually not a new authority. For the last 14 years, the state has approved and not been challenged a state special school that was a charter school down in Statesboro. So it is no more a new authority than it is a new authority, or it is misleading with the public. We have had that authority and exercised it for 14 years. It's only been taken away in the last 6 months.
All right, we have the vote. All right, we have the question. You heard the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Right hand. Count them. I need some people to help me count them. What's the count? How many? 7. All opposed, raise your hand. Hold them up. Somebody doing that iffy stuff. All right, how many? All right, the amendment's defeated. Second amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one is a little more wordy, so I made about 15 copies if members would like to see it. I worked with Betsy on the language. And so it would occur in Section 3, Mr. Chairman. This gets at Chairman Thomas's concerns. I think he was reading my mind when I was working with Legislative Counsel on this. And the amendment would occur on line 44.
All right, everyone, pay attention now.
Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. You want to look on with me?
I'll look on with you.
The amendment, actually, it's two. The first part of the amendment, Mr. Chairman, would insert the word state on line 43 between the words expend and funds. And so it would say the state is authorized to expend, quote, state funds for the support and maintenance of special schools. The next part of the amendment would occur on line 44, Mr. Chairman. It would occur after the last word of that sentence, law, you'd insert a semicolon, and it would read, quote, provided, however, in no event shall a deduction be made from a school system's state allotment as a result of its students attending a special school, Mr. Chairman. If I may explain the amendment.
Speak to
it. Here's why. If we're trying to define a charter school as a special school, we currently fund special schools in a certain way. We don't decrease a school system's allotment for every child that they send to a special school. And so if we're trying to treat charter schools as special schools, we should not then treat the funding any differently, Mr. Chairman. That's the first concern. The second concerns I have, Mr. Chairman Thomas has echoed, and just out of respect for everyone's time, I won't reiterate those, Mr. Chairman. But it's out of what Mr. Chairman Thomas said. And if they're special schools, we ought to treat them the same way as we do all the special schools.
Good. All right. I have a question number 10.
A comment, if I may.
Comment,
Mr.
right?
Chairman. The problem, well, there's several problems with this proposal. One of them, once again, is getting in too much into the minutia details of state action. The fact of the matter is, I don't believe there's anywhere in the Constitution that specifically speaks of school system state allotment. The fact of the matter is, you are putting a restriction in here where there's no express authorization for a state allotment. We do recognize that in general law, but in terms of specifics, in terms of what does or does not constitute a state allotment, there's nothing in the Constitution that defines that term that I'm aware of. Therefore, I believe not only is it defective on its merits, but it goes against generally what we're trying to do, which is to set forth generally the contours of what is and is not permissible under state law, and then allow the state legislature to fill in the details.
All right, the author, you may have a comment, and I'll give the sponsor of the amendment a comment. Make them brief.
I'd just like to ask that you vote against it. I think that this is misleading, and that I would not know if I were to read this, that even if there was no express deduction from a school system state allotment, but would this imply that I had to double fund for a student with purely state funds, and I do mean QBE funds, but I have, in good faith, by introducing the substitute to the other legislation, let you know that I am open to how we fund them as long as they are funded adequately.
All right, your comment from the sponsor of the amendment. You have the last comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just say briefly, I was actually going to work with Legislative Council to try to perfect the language in the amendment, but I realized even perfecting the language, it was going to fail today. So I'll just let members vote up or down on this language. But here's what I will say, Mr. Chairman, just briefly, and that is I don't think that we can, I think we hurt school systems when we think that we can just remove the funding for one child and it won't affect the entire school. There are fixed costs that these school systems have to deal with. If you remove 4 kids out of a school system, the lights still have to operate, the teacher still has to teach in that classroom, the bathrooms still have to work, the janitors still have to clean, unless some people have kids clean them, but janitors still have to clean the schools, Mr. Chairman. So there are fixed costs that are not recognized when you just automatically take a $1-for-$1 deduction from school systems. And so my concern is that we will continue to penalize school systems who are currently underfunding with what we think is the new thing that's going to improve education, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I want to suggest that we'll see how your amendment goes. Depending, I would suggest you work as we do the enabling legislation, and you be sure you're heard early on. Ready to take a vote? All right, you heard the amendment. Betsy, would you read us the amendment, please?
All right.
I gotta hold it, Betsy. I'm sorry. I need a second to the amendment. I have a second. All right, Betsy.
All right. So on line 43, adding the word state after the word expend, and then on line 44 after law, but before the period. Add a semicolon. Provided, however, in no event shall a deduction be made from the local school system allotment as a result of its students attending a special school.
All right, you heard it. All in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Count them for us. Get them up high. This is where we can see them. One, somebody. All right, get them high. What's the count? 4. All right, everybody has a chance. Everybody against it, please raise your right hand so that we have an accurate count because everybody going right. All right. Come on, girls. I got 17. What'd y'all get? All right, it's defeated. All right, now we're to the bill. All right, we have substitute on the table. We've had plenty of discussion. We're voting now on substitute to House Bill 1162 LC 334528S. Do I have a motion? I have a motion to bill. All right, I have 2 or 3 motions. Do I have a second? I have seconds. All right, all in favor of substitute to House Bill 1162? Resolution. Thank you, my partner. LC 334528S. Please indicate it by raising your right hand. Let's get a count. What do you have? What do you have? 15. All right. All against. Hold them up high. 6. Okay. It passes. So House Resolution Substitute LC 334528S. Please, no comments from the audience. I appreciate that. Would you please, it's moving on to rules, and you may go to, I was hoping to get back to rules today by 5, but it may not. We're hoping to get it there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they've got a tough calendar. I'm asking my committee, stay with me. I need you. We need to stay forward. We're going to take the second part, and we must get equalization out. We're going to take the second quality basic bill out. That's 1150, House Bill 1150. So if you'll please stay with us. Resolution. If you're going to the bathroom, hurry back. I got my stuff in there. All my stuff's in there. Let me see. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see. Maybe right here.
Take one mic away. That's fine. Take all of them. Oh, let it talk and go. That's right.
If we could have order. We need to continue our business.
You still in for me. I'll try to.
Ladies and gentlemen, take your celebration to the hallway.
Are you disgusting?
And your disgust.
To the hallways.
We need to continue our business. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we have House Resolution 1150 before us. Mr. Chairman, you may proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have before you the second part of the capital outlay bills that we had that came out of the Education Study Commission. This is the constitutional amendment part that is so vital. And I want you, if you would, to please follow with me very carefully. I'm going over it, and then I'll ask Lynn Jack if she would to comment if we need to. Right now this has, I want to clarify something right up front. This has absolutely nothing to do with your voting for eSplash. We're not changing eSplash, how it can be used or whatever. But what happens right now in our state, we have 180 school systems. Of those 180 school systems, 21 of them are what we call city or independent school districts. For instance, Gwinnett, we have Beaufort. In Jackson County, they have Commerce and Jefferson. They have, so you have Atlanta. Fulton County has Atlanta, and Fulton and Decatur, I think, in DeKalb. But what happens when you go for a eSplash vote now, the city and the county, by law, we're not changing this. They have to agree to call the splash election. They agree on it. Then they get together and they determine how the funds are to be allocated. we would assume that they would be allocated by FTE, per students you get it. But understand there are, now this is, understand the best information I've gotten from the State Department right now, there are four cities or 4 independent groups that represent 7 counties that they don't necessarily do it that way, but they negotiate. And they may say, look, we're trying to build a brand new school. We're only getting $1 million, but we'd like $5 million. So if you want us to go with you to call this, you give us $5 million and we'll call it. So, and I understand there's a couple of cities that have a couple of counties, and they may get twice what they should have. So, but we just think that this needs to be changed. So what we're simply saying is this constitutional amendment, if you look at it, it's very simple. It's simply saying, so the Constitution of Georgia be amended so as provided that the sales and use tax for educational purposes shall only be distributed on the basis of a full-time equivalent student count when proceeds are distributed between county and school districts and the independent school districts located in that county. And would you like to make a comment briefly?
We have 45 school systems currently in this situation. There are 46. There are 25 county systems and 21 city systems. The vast majority of them, over time, have gone to the FTE distribution. However, there are 4 city school systems that decide how much their projects for the next 5 years or whatever are going to be, and they say, this is how much we want. And we're not going to agree to a resolution unless we can get this amount. And it may be 5 times, it may be 2 times, it may be, I just want an extra $1 million. And frequently, many times it is for instructional space, but many times it's also for extraneous stadia, etc.
Football stadiums, carpet on the grass, artificial turf, just a few I know of. So, Mr. Chairman, that is basically what this bill says, and it'll be a constitutional amendment. I think it's most of the schools. Most of you don't have any city systems, and most of your city systems don't object to it and have no problem with it. I personally and some of my colleagues do have one, but I think it's a good bill and it's something that the committee recommends, and we'd like to ask that you approve. We'll take questions.
Very well. First question, Representative Maxwell.
I'm trying to think in one of my counties that I represent, there's a city, I believe, that crosses 2 county lines. Now, in this situation, if I guess they have to negotiate with each county for their T-SPLOS, so they would just get the percentage of, God, this is twisting my mind right here trying to think about this, but they would get this percentage of E-SPLOS if they've got students coming in out of the other county into their school system. If they negotiate with one county, they're just going to get the FTE count for those students that are in a city school.
That reside in that county.
That reside in that county.
We have that, Representative Maxwell, and Gwinnett, Buford. They're partially in Hall and partially in Gwinnett. When I was working with them, we'd pass a splash, we'd get with them, and we'd agree, and they get the portion of their students that reside in Gwinnett. Mm-hmm. They get, say there's 100 students in Gwinnett, they get 100 divided by whatever it was. Yeah. They also had them in Hall. When Hall wanted to go for one, they got with Buford. Buford agreed, and they say they had 100 in Hall. They got money from Hall for that 100.
Well, this has always been a contentious issue with that group, so maybe this would satisfy them.
And just clarifies it. Nobody holding anybody hostage. Okay.
Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I know since you were integral in crafting this legislation, I wanted to compliment you on creating a constitutional amendment ballot question that actually talks about exactly what's going to happen to the amendment. So it's not a question. I just wanted to compliment you on that.
Thank you. You will speak to this in the whale then, won't you? Okay. Okay. Y'all heard that. Everyone heard this. Positive in the whale. May lose my votes. Okay.
Representative Ash.
Going to be pretty similar.
Well, you come to the whale too.
Only that which it talks about. I guess my question is, consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. I have a terrible time voting for a constitutional amendment to go on the ballot without seeing enabling legislation. Is there enabling legislation for this constitutional amendment?
There's not now. There is a statute that basically just mirrors that same language. It's very minimal. So, I mean,
What would it say? Basically, just say this. What this is saying.
It basically would include that code section, have this exact same language straight in.
Okay.
I mean, it would look.
Could we do it? Should we do it now? Should we do it?
We can do it now. It would be sort of a companion bill, and it would have an extra provision that said that that bill wouldn't go into effect unless this constitutional amendment was passed.
All right, sounds good to me, Representative
I'd
Ash.
feel a whole lot better.
And then you could have that right now where we could carry it together, carry them together.
Bill, right.
And we can make a motion to bring it on, get this committee where I wouldn't have to bring it all up, just that, could that be your motion?
I'd even be willing to move this bill that's going to be written.
All right, good. See? All right, Betsy, you're on the...
That would-
Gosh, this is getting exciting. Let's take a vote quick, Mr. Chairman.
Uncharted waters, Mr. Chairman.
God, that's right. Two of my colleagues right here.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll let Brian carry that. All right, let's go.
Okay. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
I move that we do pass this bill this time. If you give me a motion in a second.
Very well. Do we have a move? We do have a
Now,
motion.
let's make it clear what we're motioning. This bill with the companion enabling legislation is what we're voting on. It'll be drafted and go at the same time. Is that right?
Let's talk about procedures here a moment.
Can that happen? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I guess the committee's prerogative. You could do that if you want. I've never heard of that done before.
Well, we said, you've heard of thinking out of the box.
I've heard of that, so, it's, however y'all want to handle it.
No, legislative, what do you suggest? What do you suggest, honestly?
Just let it be drafted and you can see it.
And go ahead and pass this one and just wait. All right, that's good. Let's pass this.
All right. Very well. We're only accepting a motion for a due pass on House Resolution 1150. Do we have a second? Very well. Any more discussion? Her microphone is not on. Very well. All in favor of a due pass on House Resolution 1150, please indicate by saying aye. All opposed, no. Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This next one's a piece of cake. Just stay with us. All right. What Betsy said, she's going to draft it up. We'll bring it back next time, and we'll go from there. So thank you. All right. Next on the agenda, we have, and I don't have my paper. What's your number? 824. We now have House Bill 824. This is another piece of legislation that came out of Representative England's subcommittee. Now, you need to realize this. We have, this committee looked at this, and they decided that this was a very important piece of legislation. It needed to go into Constitution, or into legislation. So that's why we're hearing today. So, Representative Dudgeons, if you would present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 824. I did prepare a two-page sort of layman summary here. I was going to go over that instead of the wording of the bill. The wording of the bill is very technical and math-oriented, so I want to go over.
Everyone has a copy of that, don't they?
That's right. Basically, like you said, this came out of the recommendation of the Education and Finance Study Commission. The subcommittee of Chairman England looked at basically doing a change to the equalization formula. Just so you know, we've had a lot of numbers, a lot of math here today. You know, QBE funds per student numbers. Equalization is a separate grant for low wealth systems to make up for the fact that they do not have the same amount of property tax wealth that some of the other systems do. This grant has been in place for quite some time. The current formula has been in place since 2001, and the current formula is now broken. The current formula says that next year that we should pay $832 million to low wealth systems. The appropriation amount for fiscal year 13 is only $432 million. So basically the formula now is calculating numbers that are not sustainable or are not realistic for the state. But even worse than that, remember the purpose of this program, equalization, is to give the money to the lower wealth systems who really have no property tax wealth that they can use to make up local dollars. And now, unfortunately, the percentage of money is now moving towards the systems in the upper wealth categories and away from the lower wealth categories. So that sort of in a nutshell is a problem. And so that's the problem. And also because you have a big formula in the code saying $832 million and the appropriations $430, the only legal way you can adjust that is do an across-the-board proration. So the very poorest county in Georgia gets the same percentage cut as the most wealthy county under this formula. And so again, what's happening is our very low wealth systems are really having a very difficult time. Another problem with this formula is that it is it's sort of unpredictable. The current formula basically ranks the property tax per child from 1 to 180, picks the 75th percentile and says we're going to equalize to that person the 75th percentile. Well, that actually kind of bounces around, especially some of the larger metro systems are bouncing around that line. So year over year, this formula is sort of making grants that kind of bounce all over the place. And that's another problem. Our local systems are having a very hard time budgeting because they don't know until the numbers come out. You know, their numbers could vary by quite a lot. So we want to make a more, not just a more fair formula, but one that's more stable that allows our local boards to be able to plan better. So what's the solution? Instead of what House Bill 824 does is instead of equalizing to the 75th percentile, which is just in a ranking, we're going to take the statewide average and say what's the statewide average of dollars and property tax dollars per FTE and use that. And then we do throw out the top 5% of systems and lowest 5% because in statistics it's better to get rid of outliers. So you have some very wealthy systems or very poor. You don't want to throw the average off. Again, before I continue, I want to point out that, we're kind of into the day here. There's been months and months of effort by Chairman England and by Christine Murdoch and others in the Budget Department looking at all kinds of different solutions to this problem. And this, after all that study, is really the best effort. Absolutely. That's right. And this was, I believe, Mr. Chairman, unanimously recommended by the Education and Finance Commission. Right. So this does have a lot of eyes on it, I guess, to noon. And it's also needed for next budget year. Like I said, because of the disconnect with $830 million next year versus the $430, if we do not pass this bill this year, then we're going to have some very, in the opinion of the committee, very unfair grants going out to the system. So we need to do it this year. As we had this bill introduced and so forth, one of the biggest requests has been, well, we don't want this big change, so can you either phase it in or give us a one-time grant or so to make up the difference? And the Appropriations Committee this morning very generously was able to make $7 million available on a one-time grant for the amended fiscal year 12, which is going to make up a percentage of some of the lost revenue in some systems, because the change in formula, guys, there are winners and there are losers, but we think the winners are the systems that the formula was designed to do in the first place. And no formula is sacred, and the fact that it became a formula 2001 doesn't mean that it was the exact formula. And we feel, again, that with a lot of study, this formula is much better for the purpose of the grant. But even in consideration of the hold harmless, we did have that $7 million. But I also want to make a point, too, is that because the current formula kind of bounces around all the time, we've had systems who've gone up and down the past few years anyway, and we haven't held them harmless. So it's really kind of hard to sort of take this in a vacuum and say there's some exact way we can make it 100% no impact to everybody. It's just not really that feasible. My graphs on the second page there, I mean, it kind of shows, it was a color graph. It was kind of dumb for a black and white copy. I apologize. But basically we're pointing out that in the old formula, 28% of the funding was going to the low wealth systems, the lowest 25%, and now it's 36% from a math. So the new formula sends $156 million to the poorest 25% of our systems, and the old formula only sends 123. The old formula sent 27% of the grant to systems which were above the 50th percentile in property tax wealth, and the new formula only sends 16. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I don't think there's a need to go over the bill language because, again, it's a mathematical type of a thing, but I'll be certainly glad to answer questions.
If I have any questions, you hear what the bill is. Representative Morgan?
I am completely confused.
Thank you. I did a good job.
Yes.
You were still thinking about capital outlay.
Apparently so.
Yes.
So if you could just help me.
Yes.
The bottom line.
Yes.
I live in a higher wealth
yes.
system. I want to know.
It does not affect Cobb County at all.
And I understand that.
Yes.
but I am also concerned about low wealth districts losing funding. But as I'm looking at this chart under, and the explanation under hold harmless funding, it appears that if this formula is adjusted, that there will be some sort of, if there is a deduction, that the lower wealth districts will not see the level of hit or an equitable hit.
It's the complete reverse. The entire purpose of the funding change is to get more money to the low wealth district. That's the entire reason we're doing this.
Okay.
And most of the hold harmless is actually some of the higher wealth districts who are still getting funding won't lose as much. So basically, if you look at the list, and I'll have the list, I'll be glad to show you. If you look at the list of people getting increased funding, it is all the ones towards the bottom of the wealth chart. So the entire purpose of this is to move the grant to the lower wealth systems.
For a good example, Representative for England gave me this before I left. He said Pelham City, one meal generates $33,000. That's it. Wow. In Gwinnett, one meal generates $12 million a year. So if they go $16 million, that's still only $330-something thousand they have for the year. So we're hoping that, and this money is really helping the Pelham City. If we'd done it the old way, Pelham City, I'm not sure, I think he said they only have 400 or 500 students. Y'all can correct me, it's not many, but they'd only gotten that times the amount. And I used my system, like Gwinnett, 165,000. Under the old grant, Gwinnett would have gotten $108 million out of this because of the large number of students. And I want to say I worked with Alvin, and Rick Koss, standing right down there when it passed, shook my hand and said, thank you, this is fine, and I think it's the best we can do. And I would not say that in public and on TV if Rick, that's what Rick said. Is anyone from Gwinnett here? Dave, I think he's gone. But under this plan, Gwinnett's still going to get, I think it's 30-something million.
It's around 45.
45 million. So they're losing, but under the old way, it was no way. But if we'd have kept it like it was, even proration, they'd have gotten like maybe 50 million, but they didn't lose as much as they thought, so they're happy. But this is helping the Pelham cities, the Faro counties, that's what's the ones that need it. It's forcing more money down to the poor systems.
Okay, so let me ask another question then. If we are to face an economic downturn as we have and we're getting past now, if we get to that place again, what would be the impact of these changes?
Well, that's one of the biggest reasons we need to do that, because we have had economic downturn, and so we are not fully funding the formula, and that's one of the crux of the problems, because we don't fully fund it. Again, when we prorate, the legal thing is I have to give the same cut to the lowest system as I give to the highest system. And because the formula is shooting out these huge numbers, the idea is to make the formula shoot out numbers that are more achievable. And in fact, the goal is that over time we can fully fund the equalization formula, which we haven't done in some time, because now the formula is producing a number which is realistic. I think the formula shoots out, the new formula, it doesn't shoot out 436, which is the appropriation, but something in the high 400s. And the idea is that we'd be able to do that. If we do not make this change, the formula will continue to shoot out really large numbers, and we are going to hurt those low wealth systems harder and harder. So this is actually made to exactly to deal with the
to get what it was intended for. The thing you got to realize, the Cobbs, the Atlanta cities, the CAB, they don't get it anyway, no matter what formula you use.
That's right.
Gwinnett just started because of its large numbers and its high number of free lunches, and now so it's some of these systems have never gotten it and wouldn't get it anyway. There's a couple of the systems that were going to get it that didn't get it, that got it and did get it. That's what he meant. It was just bumping how it was there. Okay. So throwing out the top 5% wealthiest. Greene County, I think, was the wealthiest, which shocked me.
Greene County is the wealthiest per child.
And Burke County has the highest unemployment, but one of the wealthiest because of Plant Vogel. Those were some that would, and then your lowest wealth. So this made it at the state average instead of the 75th percentile. It popped it every time.
Thank you.
Any other? All right, I have Representative Lindsay.
Just a compliment to the author of the bill. This is something that I think we've been needing for quite some time, and I tried to do it 2 years ago, and I still have the arrows in my back.
Yes.
The scars are still there.
I've got a flak jacket in my office. I'm going to be putting on.
But it is fair.
Yeah.
I mean, in times in which we cannot regrettably fully fund equalization, we need to do our best to protect those school systems that are the most vulnerable among us. And I heartily support it, and let me know when I can.
All right, I have 3 more questions, and I'll let you make the motion, because since you carried it last time and have the scars, still have the bullseye on your back. All right, Kathy? Representative Ash, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you, Mr. Chairman, and to the author. I have high respect for the two of you, but when I see Christine and Scott there saying this is a good thing, I'm certain that it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
But because I was not a part of this long-term discussion that's occurred, and we still have some of the folks in the back
I'm
who
gonna
are
give them a
those
chance,
school
yeah.
people, I'd love to hear from them, just a thumbs up or
I
a thumbs
plan
down.
to. I plan to.
Okay.
Yeah, because this one was not discussed before. They will have a chance. Yes. All right. 17. Yes, you're on.
Thank you.
Barbara, you Representative Reese. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the legislation. I do have some concerns here without the gradual implementation of the bill, so that these 57 systems that will receive less money would have more time to plan. And, you know, I can just see in some systems the possibility of a teacher or two being cut from the Senate system because of the loss of the funds. I wish some way had been devised where this would gradually be implemented, or some additional funding would be made for a period of years. Also, I would have liked to have seen a list of those 57.
Let me say this, Representative Reese. The systems have been involved. They know it. And matter of fact, they know who they are. They know what it is. For the long, go ahead.
Representative, I have it on my laptop. Be glad to show it to
Yeah,
you
give it to
as soon
you.
as we adjourn. I will say, though, then this is, I should have put this in my paper, and I will add it for later. 57 in the new formula lose funding. There's a significant number who lose funding in the old formula.
Bigger losses.
Which ironically are the lower wealth systems who lose funding in the old formula. So it's not like the old formula everybody gets more money. We're just changing the list of who gets
Of the
less
loser.
money. The losers. I mean, just to be frank about it. That's right.
All right, Representative Setzler.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I need to say much. I was trying to offer a clarification for folks who are trying to get their minds around this. I just, Representative Dudgeon walked me through it yesterday. If you're in the top 25% systems, of which COP is one, it has no impact on you.
That's right.
It's really those folks that are up in that 50th and 75th percentile.
That's correct.
Who we wouldn't look at as being poor systems, who've been net gainers from this.
Correct.
It's adjusted for them so that we can really fund the systems that our constituents, you know, when we talk about this formula back home, we talk about poor systems. They in their mind's eye have what that looks like. We've been funding the Gwinnettes, and they don't think about them as really poor systems. I think this provides that.
That's
balance.
correct.
And that 57%.
Thank you.
All right, number 11. Welch, Representative Welch.
Representative Dudgeon, can you tell me how Henry County fares in this matrix?
Off the top of my head, I think actually Henry County is one of the ones who loses a little bit of money, but I can check my laptop. So I'll be glad.
But under that $7 million, they're getting some to help them where it won't be.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that the superintendents ask us, and when we passed this, said, I'll have to give Will Schofield. He wrote me, and his CFO was up here and voted.
Right.
He said, Hall County is a big loser. And one of the questions they had, could we phase it? Which we can't. It's going to cause the same problems if you do. But we picked the $7 million to try to soften the blow a little bit for that group. But this way is more predictable year after year after year. So get with him and he'll give you exact numbers. And I think that'd be something good to have for all the rest.
No, I have it. Yeah,
and he has it. He'll get it for you.
Yeah.
Any other? I see no other questions. So I'll turn to. I want to give the audience. Is there anybody in the audience that has a burning? Would you just stand up and, for Kathy's sake, where'd she go? Anybody have anything they want to say? How many, for her sake? How many? I don't know if you want to say endorse or don't endorse, but I think a lot. How many were there while we did it? I'll put there with you. How many were involved with doing it? They're the ones with us. But anybody want to say anything now? I'm giving you your chance. Anybody wants to make a comment? Anyone? Josh, I want to apologize to you. I just saw you were wanting to comment on capital outlay, and I'll give you a chance in a minute. But anybody want to make a comment about equalization? All right. If not, I entertain a motion. Representative Lindsay. Say that louder. All right. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, please indicate by raising your right hand. Kathy, get in here and vote. I want to. All right, all opposed, like sign. How many? Let's see how many is opposed. Raise your hand. Anybody opposed? All right, unanimous. Kathy, they did. Where'd you go? She left again. I want to tell y'all. Your people. I gave them a chance to talk, and they said they'd rather see you in the hall. Thank y'all for coming. We had hold just a second. We have to assign some bills. Hear this. And look, we're going to have we got some good hearings. I want to commend Randy Nix for a fantastic hearing yesterday on that hazing bill. That was interesting. All right, David?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, real quick, especially if you're taking notes. House Bill 528 by Representative Reese, school bus operation that is assigned to academic support. Academic support. House Bill 567 by Representative Benfield, public school students' records, the option not to release to military recruiters. That is being assigned to academic support. Academic support. House Bill 651, charter system earnings by Representative Maxwell. That's being assigned to academic innovations. House Bill 654 by Representative Setzler, the LIFE Act. That is being assigned to academic innovations. House Bill 807 by Representative Taylor, the Dropout Deterrent Act, that is being assigned to academic achievement. House Bill 809 by Representative Peake, the High School Athletics Overview Committee, that is being assigned to academic innovations. And I'll give you the reasoning on that is that it is creating this committee, and I think that that would be an appropriate subcommittee. House Bill 821 by Representative Oliver. It's elementary and secondary education, the mandatory attendance. That is being assigned to academic achievement. Academic achievement. House Bill 824 by Representative Dudgeon. This is, actually, that's the one we just did.
Just pass it.
No problem. House Bill 825 by Representative Nix. This is time frame relative to hearings for administrative law judges. That is academic support. Academic support and, no, not an and. House Bill 836 by Representative Roberts. It's another version of the High School Athletics Overview Committee. That is academic innovations. Academic innovations. House Bill 856 by Representative Scott. This is elementary and secondary education. This is for students with chronic disciplinary problems, providing observation by parents, academic achievement. Academic achievement. And finally, House Bill 859 by Representative Sims. It is the governor's authority over State Board of Education that is being assigned to academic support. Academic support, and that is all the bills, Mr. Chairman.
Let me say to you, I plan, for instance, the bullying bill that Barbara, Representative Reese has. Representative Nix has done a great start with the hazing bill. I plan to roll some of those in and continue with those hearings and try to look K-12 through university with a lot of that. We also plan to roll some of these bills. Representative Taylor's bill, is he here, about the school attendance age. We plan to roll some of those together, and we are going to have hearings on these, and we do plan to move some possibly, so we want you to come and hear them. Any other questions from the committee? All right, you've been here. Thank you for the marathon, and I appreciate you. If anyone wants to see us, we're adjourning to David Cass's office. Christine, would you see me before you leave? I need to see him. Josh, if I could see you, Josh Mackey, too. And Courtney.
Oh, no, I've already gotten arrows.